Welcome back, everyone. Today, I want to talk about the question, is there such a thing as owning too many LLCs? And this is a question I get a lot from my clients, particularly when they're thinking about buying their first rental property or they're thinking about doing some private money lending deals with me. They ask me, Tom, should I open up an LLC first before doing these transactions? And I'll hit on first the rental property. So my thought is simply this: when you do start buying properties, you don't necessarily need to have an LLC before you buy one property, but you should open up one LLC, pick up 3 or 4 properties in a certain metro, put those properties in that LLC, and then around 4 properties, you do want to, by the way, single family properties, you do want to open up another LLC to begin to put the new properties in that one. You don't want to keep too much of your assets in any one LLC, because in theory, if you do get sued, someone could go after those assets. And so you do want to have a cap or a ceiling on how much exposure you would take if you got into a lawsuit. So while I don't think you need to have an LLC to get started, you will eventually want to create an LLC to put those assets in. So another one is private money lending. Should I have an LLC with private money lending? Ultimately, I think yes. To get started, I don't think so. And I say that because let's take, for example, if you have $100,000 in private money lending deals, you're probably making $15,000 a year in income. Okay. So in that scenario, it's not so much about litigation or liability. It's more about, if you have $15,000 of income, can you run expenses through that business to offset that income? And it does take around $100,000 of private money lending to make sense of an LLC. So that rule of thumb there is I wouldn't open up an LLC until you have about $100,000 of income. $100,000 of capital invested, which is producing around $15,000 a year. That will allow you to put expenses like cell phones. You can book travel depending on how you do it. You can even put a car in the LLC and collect that depreciation and offset the revenue by tax write-offs, ultimately resulting in you not owning any taxes on that income. So long story short, should you have an LLC? Yes, you should at some point. It all depends on what the asset type is. Now, the other question is there such a thing as too many LLCs? And I do think so. It depends on what you're doing. If you're opening up businesses, I do think every business needs to have an LLC naturally. So that would be a thing. So if you open up, let's say, a convenience store, that would require an LLC. If you open up a barber shop, that would require an LLC. And then properties would require an LLC. And on top of that, you would want to create a parent LLC to own all those subsidiary LLCs. So here's the thing, though. You can see how this gets very complicated very quickly. What I would recommend is to think about the benefit that you're getting and open up an LLC versus the cost of having that LLC, right? Now, to have one, you are going to have to pay taxes every year. And on the low end, you're going to spend $800 for a tax return, up to thousands of dollars, depending on how complex your business is, right? So I currently own 5 LLCs now, and I'm in a variety of different asset types. And my tax returns just for the LLCs alone are almost $6,000 each year. And if you're creating an LLC in a state like California, which I would recommend not doing, you have to pay their franchise fees and their own LLC fees, which is around $1,000 a year, I believe, total right now. So long story short, LLCs are a really strategic instrument to use in investing. You want to use it to ultimately protect against litigation with rental properties. And then for other asset classes, the goal of it really is to drive income through it and offset it with personal expenses, which ultimately lowers your taxable income, right? So that's my recommendation, but I think you do have to consider the cost of owning an LLC every year. You need QuickBooks to run the expenses. It can be very expensive. So I would recommend doing it once you're more established. With rental properties, it is good to get started with an LLC first. Take the loans out in your personal name and then transfer them over, or transfer the titles over to the LLC. That would be a good move. And so I'm curious to know what your LLC strategy is. If you like what you heard, give it a thumbs up. We'll be doing more of these LLC strategy calls in the future, but I do want to come out and just give you a high level whether or not it is important to have an LLC.